Good morning. Thank you very, very much. I'm glad that you've all encountered this cold and blustery day to be part of our October monthly memorial service. And specifically to those here honoring a loved one on this day, thank you very much for directing your attention to those intangible things like heart and caring that we've received and continue to receive through the people that have loved and cared for us. Thank you also for honoring the concept of putting that gratitude into motion. We all, I think, know, not quite as well as we might should, that we receive much. And how can we possibly do nothing in return? Those that we love are still active and omnipresent influences on our lives. Luckily, in Toronto, this sense of being cared for and supportive can be found in many places, even outside of the temple. Today we're very, very lucky because we have Dr. Janet McLellan, who has, in her own way, been contributing to the understanding of Buddhism for going on approximately 20 years now. So, she received her PhD in social anthropology from York University in 1993. She has taught at Trent and University of Toronto, and has been a professor at Wilfrid Laurier University since 2001 in the Religion and Culture Department. Her research is focused on the resettlement dynamics of Asian immigrants and refugees in Toronto, and particularly the role of religion in maintaining and redefining ethnic and cultural identity. And so I knew, coming from the sociological slant, that Dr. McLellan would have a kind of firm resonance in what the teaching does within the community and how the teaching takes root, in our lives and hearts. And so I had a chance to read her Dharma message before you. It's really very good. We're very lucky to have her today. So without any further ado, if I could call on Dr. McLellan, please.
Thing from my mind is to want to stand out here and talk on things that I think are just so better left unsaid and just let the heart go in the chanting. So I have to take my hat off from my heart and now put it on my head, which I'm not always sure is a good thing. So please bear with me. I also apologize for the hat. I'm not trying to hide, but I have light blindness. So I have to protect one side of me, and so that's why I wear Jordan hats. It's not a fashion statement. Anyways, just let me say what an honor it is to be back at Toronto Buddhist Church. Moving to Waterloo isolates me from a lot of the communities that I feel most comfortable with, and that includes the one here at Toronto Buddhist Church. Nevertheless, there is always a part of me in my daily meditations that always does Nembutsu and tries to incorporate and resonate with many of the teachings that are coming through. And indeed, I think that this weekend is a wonderful opportunity to be able to give the words that I am giving, because this is the Thanksgiving weekend. And it's also Memorial Weekend, which is Thanksgiving. And so truly it's the embodiment of Jodo Shinshu in its constant recognition of thankfulness for all that we have and all that we aspire to be. So with those nice words, let me get into the academic part of me. That again, I'm not so sure is worthwhile listening to, but you've asked me, so bear with it then. Professors, I think, lose sight of life. And certainly we end up talking a lot of stuff that most people listen to and think, yes, but you could say it in so much simpler way. Anyways, what my talk is going to be on is really about in general, the processes of life, the changing and the shifts and the accommodations we all make every moment, every day of our lives, especially the transitions as we go through our various life stages. And I don't look at that so much on the individual level, but in my scholarly life, I've tried to look at that within communities and with groups. And as Reverend Hayashi mentioned, I have looked at Asian immigrants and refugees in particular, and how they undertake their migration, whether it's in the last 30 years or whether it was 100 years ago. These kind of generational changes and the changes that happen within their lives are all part of a larger momentum of accommodating, adapting, but also retaining what is the strongest and the most important element. And so my work has been to look at the ability of a community to reestablish themselves. And the interest that I have always had was in the way in which they have established their religious traditions. And of course, establishing religious traditions is not easy. And it's especially difficult when you've got multiple characteristics that are perceived as not as easy to understand. And that is cultural differences, when you have racial differences, and of course when you have religious differences. And so what I've looked at is the way in which Buddhists have been able to recreate and redefine their religious identity. And among Buddhists, we know that there are so many different kinds of Buddhist approaches, that there's an entire range, not just within Mahayana and Theravada, but also even within Mahayana groups and within different Theravada groups. But in addition to these very different Buddhist traditions and practices and ways of understanding Buddha Dharma, there is also a huge range of pre-migration experiences, of the levels of what I'll be speaking about, of their social and economic capital, and of course the reception and the assistance that they received that has helped them integrate into the new social context. The cultivation and continuity of what I refer to as social capital is what I think an especially important element that helps individuals and groups to enhance their ability to cope with the various struggles and challenges. And for most Asian immigrants and refugees, there is often a pervasive unfamiliarity with Canadian culture or language, or two, very overt and explicit experiences of racism and discrimination in accessing housing or employment. The long history of Asian Buddhists in Canada demonstrates this process. And it often becomes most evident when the different groups and ethnic communities begin to develop their own religious places and spaces. You know, Canadian racism is very polite, and as long as you hide away and keep to yourselves, there is a certain maintaining of politeness. But as soon as groups try and step up into the public forefront and say, we too want to have our own places of worship, then the reactions begin. And of course, for many of you here today, you very well know the experiences that the Japanese Canadians had in establishing Toronto Buddhist Church during the 1940s and 1950s. And yes, things did change for the better by the time the 70s and the 80s, when a lot of new immigrant Buddhist communities came in, but unfortunately, still today in the 21st century, these processes still arise. Overt neighborhood hostility, various municipal bylaws that are restrictive into trying to build their temples, and of course the often lack of public support in helping people reestablish themselves. The dynamics of these tensions over the places of worship, however, also reveal the power within the communities themselves. That's what I refer to as social capital. Because social capital are the linkages and the networks within the communities that help them build strong common bonds and support. The strong social cohesion that is within communities is essential for their effective identity representation and is especially essential to not only counter but to endure the negative stereotypes that all too easily rise towards religious and racial minorities. It is social capital, that which is within people's hearts and minds and relationships with one another, that comprises the various social structures that make it possible to rely on the networks of obligations, expectations, and trustworthiness within the groups and communities that they can then achieve particular goals and support system. Now, in the scholarly analysis of social capital, they tend to identify three different types. There is the bonding social capital within the particular group. So within Toronto Buddhist Church, it would be within the families and the friends and the community that comprises this particular religious institution. There is also a secondary form that is called linking capital. And that is when communities step out of their own common interests and they begin to share with others, either of their own ethnic and linguistic identity, such as, for example, when Toronto Buddhist Church youth began to bridge their differences with many of the Christian Japanese Canadian youth, and they began to do various forms of activities throughout the years. It's what we see in the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center, that everyone bridges differences and they come together for common goals. And then there is a third form, which is called linking capital. And this is when the groups begin to link with other very deeply settled forms of social processes, decision-making, hierarchy, and political participation for that kind of broad social representation. And I would say one of the effects of that kind of linking capital was a successful redress that finally came better late than never. The presence of leadership and extended social networks are especially critical for religious communities to express their distinctiveness and to develop affinities with the host society. And this is very important. And we at Toronto Buddhist Church have a very long precedent of being able to model this, especially to other Buddhist groups, because it was very early in the late 50s and the 1960s that we saw the ability of a religious minority community that had overcome incredible challenges and barriers and hardships and grief over what they had lost on so many levels. Yet, their ability to reach out, especially under the efforts of Reverend Suji to develop effective interfaith and interreligious activities, the scholarly exchanges that they developed with the University of Toronto, all continued to build throughout the 70s and the 80s under Reverend Fujikawa, in which the Toronto Buddhist Church was an active founding member of the Buddhist Federation and the Toronto Buddhist Council that helped to develop a strong Buddhist voice for political and social recognition. So all of this both on the secular as well as the religious level, helps to develop strong social capital. Another expression of this can also be seen what is known in the literature as spiritual capital. Now, spiritual capital in most of the literature is confined to the very effective role of religious communities integrating in social participation, the way that they as a group represent themselves in, say, United Way fundraisers, the way in which the elders and the ministers of the church integrate on many other levels. However, what I like to do is to move this idea of spiritual capital into a new form. And this is part of the research that I'm trying to develop at this particular time in my life. And this is moving religious and spiritual capital into what I refer to as a spirit-based capital. But before I do that, just let me build a foundation. Because to me, what we have done today in the chanting and in the offering will all be seen, what I understand, to be spirit-based capital. Things that we can rely on, that we can call upon, whether in a group or individually, to help give us strength, clarity, and direction. Excuse me, just well, I did a lot of chanting, so my throat's a bit dry. Within a resettlement context, and when I mean by resettlement, I just don't mean having a group come from their homeland and then directly come into a new social context, such as Canada, but I also mean resettlement, such as when the Japanese Canadians moved, or were forced to move, from British Columbia into Ontario and Quebec. And then that resettlement from the outlying areas of Toronto, then into Toronto proper. All of these are a long process, and it all takes many decades and generations to really feel that one is finally settled. And for some people, especially refugees, they never, ever, not in the first generation, ever feel truly settled just because of what they've undergone before. So when I talk about resettlement, understand that it's not just a small, year-long process, but it takes, for different groups and different individuals, longer periods. But the resettlement is often where we see the great importance of religious institutions and the practices and the rituals contained therein. Religious leadership provides such important roles to help reestablish traditional beliefs and ritual practices, but also going beyond that traditional form into new forms that help people adapt and integrate. So religious services, religious interactions between clergy and people are so important for psychological health, for social affiliation, for community authority patterns, and to support traditional family roles. And of course, underlying all of that is the enormous role that religion plays in helping to maintain and support cultural and ethnic identity. For many of the smaller Buddhist communities, the Buddhist temple becomes the focal point of social interaction as well as the center for cultural and spiritual life. And here at Toronto Buddhist Church, for many of those first and second generation people resettled in the Toronto area, over 2 or 3 decades, it was Toronto Buddhist Church that became the social milieu for their gatherings. And you have the development of many different generational groups. The men's Sangha, the women's Dharma groups, both East and West, the Shinshu, Jinkai, all of them support such a wide range of activities. And nowadays, some of these may seem to be moving out, but still, in their time, they were critical. The karaoke, the mochi making, the bazaars, the crafts, the annual conferences and picnics, the internment camp reunion parties, the church dinners, the dances, the sports, supporting the elderly, all of these become the glue that keep people connected and together. In addition, there is the numerous Japanese cultural and religious traditions of Bon-Dori, Ikebana, the tea ceremonies, and the Dharma school. All of these facets, again, become the continuities, yet they don't stay identical. They shift and they change, and the new generations come up and they put their own emphasis on it. Still, it is a pervasive quality. Now, based on all of that, what I would like to suggest is that there is something else that is often ignored, but which I believe is the fundamental dynamic for the health and cohesion of the community. And this element is what I refer to as the spirit-based capital. And it is this spirit-based capital, with all of its bonding and linking, and if I had time, and you were really willing to be bored, I could go on about how to do bonding, bridging, and linking the spirit-based capital, but I won't put you through that. We actually do have a life to lead outside of this, and I will get on with it. But I really think that this is an absolute essential quality. But the spirit-based capital that I'm trying to convey is what is seen in people's actions and engagement with the spirit world, or the world that is referred to as the unseen realms, wherein ancestors and other spirit beings abide, and through which blessings, merit, and protection arise. And the reason that I say it this way is that scholars often forget, and yet they should know. In Hamlet, for example, Horatio tells Hamlet, there are so many things in heaven and earth that are beyond your comprehension. And we know that there is this human manifestation, this form on this plane of conditioned existence. But there is also other realms that exist. And just because our sensory capacities may not be able to statistically or scientifically document them, we have other experiential ways of knowing their presence. And so it is to this realm that I speak. And again, I can't prove it other than to say that we need to find it for ourselves. Very Buddhist, which is why I like being a Buddhist academic. Anyways, the spirit world is so important for Buddhists particularly. Among Theravada Buddhists, they feel that it is through the mediation of the monastic rituals that the engagement within the spirit realms, that things can be activated. Monastics, for Theravada Buddhists, the male monastics, become fields of merit in which the monks can help transfer the blessings to the ancestors and to other beings in after-death realms, wherever they may be, the good places as well as the more unwholesome places. And they also act as a conduit for the other realm blessings to come to the people. For many Asian Buddhists, the spirit worlds and traditional Buddhist beliefs and practices are inseparable. And it is an interconnectedness within humans on this realm and those of the spirits. At times of crisis, emotional upheaval or loss, seeking strength or guidance from the spirit world becomes especially important to ease both physical as well as mental suffering. Among my own work among the Cambodian Buddhists in Ontario, their various spirit-based relationships involve numerous levels of obligations, reciprocity, rewards, dependence, and manipulation, as well as negotiation. Well, I'll keep offering, but I want, some blessings in return. And that then creates a whole range of spiritual capital. That actually in the scholarly literature is considered rational choice behavior. It's not an irrational form of interaction. People know why they do it, and it's perfectly logical within their own levels of understanding. The networks that people established within these unseen realms also support the communal ceremonies that again help negotiate spiritual blessings and protection that in turn promote group solidarity and cohesion and provide individual psychological comfort. Within Jodo Shinshu, the predominant spirit realm would be seen as Amita's Pure Land, with engagement activated through chanting, for example, in Nambutsu, through the memorial ceremonies like what we have today, or felt through the blessings of Shinju, that of grace and faith. The recitation of Namo Nambutsu is an expression of thanks and gratitude. It is part of one's faith that Amida Buddha will provide rebirth in the Pure Land. An unconditional acceptance of Amida Buddha's total compassion is the grounding for people's serenity, for a clear mind that can help them accept the many sufferings that will and do indeed arise in life. Within this serenity and sense of connection with Amida Buddha, there comes the cultivation of deep gratitude and thanksgiving. And within every teaching, we know that this describes and defines the Jodo Shinshu way of life, especially with its emphasis on thinking of others. It is this that I refer to as spiritual-based capital. It is this serenity and confidence and gratitude and connection, the grace for those who are with joy and can get that can be accessed, utilized, and then in turn offered to the surrounding world society within one's own supportive, nurturing community or family or temple, or further out. This, to me, is the natural progression arising from our recognition of Amida's wisdom and compassion working in our lives. When it arises within the resonance, it's like the bell. The bell needs to be activated, and it vibrates. The bell itself vibrates, but the resonance, the waves carry out. And that is how I understand the resonance within from Amida Buddha that goes then without. Gratitude and thanksgiving to the ancestors, to the newly deceased, and especially to love to one's loved parents is an inherent quality of the memorial service. The presence of the hymnals that we see, the incense offering, and the bowing to Amida Buddha during the service are all an expression of gratitude and honoring of the deceased in the Pure Land. Maybe it's sort of telling me move it. Similar practices do occur through Toronto Vietnamese temples, they will also be having a weekly memorial observance, Kia Su, which instead of having it once a month, they have it as part of their weekly service. And that is a change, but we can understand that because as refugees, what they lost and the suffering and the grief and the death on so many levels made them need to have a constant memorial recognition. But anyways, they have also a huge memorial board that comes up, and they also have pictures of the deceased as a visual reminder of the values they must keep. Among the Vietnamese, like many Southeast Asians, the ancestral veneration is a predominant element of filial piety, family continuity, and spiritual power. Ancestors are called to come and join all ceremonies and cultural festivals. People place food as offerings on the various shrines, and all of this is to show their respect and recognition as the ancestors, as powerful spirit beings who provide blessings. Now, that form of ancestral honoring is very different from the Jodo Shinshu. Here at the memorial service, this is not an expression to call upon the ancestors for blessings and assistance. It's not a negotiation to say, hey, look how filial we are, so be nice to us because we're honoring you. No, in Jodo Shinshu, the ancestors, especially those who have gone to the Pure Land, are interpreted very differently. Here they are interpreted as bodhisattvas, and it is the memorial service that provides the opportunities to gather with family and friends, to remind ourselves of our great gratitude to Amida Buddha and to the teachings of the Buddha, of the impermanency of this world, and of the importance of Shinshu as a guiding force in one's life. In Jodo Shinshu, thankfulness is given to the deceased, but without expectations. So here we gather today within a memorial service, and the memorial service becomes a teaching opportunity where we can remember those with respect, affection, and gratitude, where we take time to reflect on what is important in the here and the now, and especially how we can understand more clearly and to feel more deeply the teachings of the Buddha Dharma. In conclusion, you can relax now. Only a few more sentences. What I've tried to convey is that spiritual capital networks that are being forged at the different Buddhist temples, but I would suggest it is the spiritual capital that is being forged in all of the religious attempts, in whatever religious traditions. As long as you have people opening their hearts and their minds up to a greater spirit, up to a greater power that we in our totally pitiful, small human lives and our pitiful human brains who can never begin to understand something like the Dharmakaya, something like the Pure Land. We're like the drops of water that try and understand the ocean. We're a part of it, but we're just easily gone in a moment. I think that all beings who open up to this power, however they do it, are utilizing the spirit-based capital. Because those who open up, those who in times of trouble, who in grief, who in confusion, even in joy, you can open up and get the infusion and meet as light. And I think that that's something that we can never underestimate, what light is. That luminosity, that brightening, that element within the emptiness that is no form, but it is there. And it is that luminosity that if you can even momentarily begin to feel it and begin to have it in, that light is a radiance. And I always think of Amida Buddha as the lighthouse. And when I went to Peggy's Cove, not only is it a very powerful place because of the airplane which went down there, many people make pilgrimage, but when I saw that lighthouse and on the rock, I sat there and I thought, that's Amida Buddha. Because the lighthouse shines. It shines on the sinners, it shines on the pleasure seekers, it shines on the ones who are actively trying to see and find guidance. It doesn't matter. It doesn't discriminate. It is all encompassing, non-discrimination, shining light. And that, I think, is spirit-based capital. Because we can all benefit from that light, and once connected with that spirit-based power, however we understand it, we not only help ourselves, but we help the groups we are connected with, and from there it continues to resonate out. So, thank you very much for allowing me to share these few thoughts with you on spirit-based capital. I doubt I can ever put it into academic jargon, what I really feel, but I'll certainly try. But I hope you have enjoyed me. And Joshua, I thank you for the opportunity of being here.
Dr. McLellan, I can't thank you enough for taking the amount of time that you took to prepare that Dharma talk for us. I appreciate it very much. From a personal context, it touched on a number of elements of my own life. I personally immigrated from Japan at a very young age and took a substantial amount of time to find my place in society. And in the context of the temple, we are also trying to find our place in the community in Canada. And hearing a scholarly context to the journey that we are all taking is very enlightening. So I thank you very much.